Yes, it is. Okay. If you have your Bibles, let's go to Matthew 18. Matthew 18. We're going to start looking at verse 15. The last time we were together, we did, it felt like mostly review, but just trying to get some things straightened again. We talked about lost sheep and little children and who Jesus says is going to be the greatest in the kingdom. So there's in all those things there's sort of this underlying current of humility and putting others first. And we know that sometimes even when we're trying to be humble and to put others first, that there are problems with other people. We get sideways, we get offended, we get hurt, we're sinned against. And so um, in Matthew 18, Jesus gives some guidance about how to deal with a fractured relationship inside the church. Brothers and sisters, something happens, then they're not getting along. Here's what we do. So Matthew 18, verse 15. Jesus says, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they won't listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of two or three witnesses. That's a quote. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly, I tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where two or three gather in my name, there I am with them. Okay, so there's at least two or three things in there which probably sound kind of familiar, things that you have heard people say at church from time to time. And we'll get to those in a moment. But really the whole context of what Jesus is talking about here is issues and offenses that occur inside the Christian community when believers in Jesus get sideways. And he mostly looks at it from the perspective of the one who was wronged. He says, if your brother or sister sins against you, like, okay, so I'm offended, I've been hurt, I've been sinned against. How should I respond? So he tells how to forgive and to restore the relationship. So now, if you leave part of that out, if your brother sins, then that kind of changes the dynamics a little bit. If a brother sins, here's what we should do. Yes, dear. I, why? Um, I would have to, I'm not sure where I would look for that information. It would either be at home in a stack someplace, or it would be in the safe deposit box at the credit union. So it would not be something I could do in the next hour. You cannot figure out your social security number. Yeah. Okay. Well, that would be ideal. I know that Coles is at home someplace, but I'm not sure there's. So.
Can't buy for her credit by myself.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll see if we can figure it out. I'm sorry to hear. Okay, bye.
When you apply for a job.
No. They just call me.
Sorry about that. Calls from the responsible one in the middle of the day always go to the top of the list, so. All right, so, if Jesus just said, I think where I am here, if your brother or sister sins, not necessarily against you, then he's given some instructions on how to handle church discipline. But this is the against you part. So how do we make things better? Because inevitably we get our feelings hurt, somebody says something insensitive or does something insensitive, and we feel like we've been injured or wounded in some way. What do we do? The first step is what, according to Jesus?
Go talk to them about it.
Yes. Don't tell your spouse, don't tell your friends, don't tell the elders, don't put it on Facebook. It says, go to them individually, specifically, privately, confront that person privately, and then show them the sin, not to prove that they're wrong, but because you want to restore the relationship. All of this has to be done not with like a high-handed sense of I am right and you're wrong, and let me show you how you have made a mistake here. But it is, I love you, I miss you, I don't like the way that things are, I want to fix it. So let's talk about this. Show them the sin. Do that with humility and concern. There's a verse from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17 that says, do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly, so you will not share in their guilt. You know, you're not coming to the person just to show them your fault, their fault. You're not trying to make them feel bad. You're doing it to fix the relationship. Now, Jesus says, if you go to that person and you say, here's what happened. I don't know if you're aware of how that made me feel, but I feel like you have sinned against me, and I want us to make this right. If their answer is, oh my gosh, I had no idea, I'm so very sorry, will you please forgive me? Then, yay, everything is fixed and you can move on. You hug, you go have coffee, and you move on with the rest of your life. But sometimes there's resistance. And so what is the next step that Jesus suggests?
Take a few of your friends.
Witnesses.
Get
Okay.
some backup.
Take 2 or 3 people with you. Now, I have typically looked at that as that these witnesses are I don't even know the right words. Apparently my brain is not awake yet. That these witnesses are there kind of as like extra head pressure to push them into to making things right, or maybe they saw what happened and so they're there as witnesses. I'm not sure that's the deal. I believe that they're not there to put the squeeze on them or to stand as witnesses in the box, like, what did you see on the night of, like, not those kind of witnesses. I think they're there primarily
Mediators.
to be witnesses to the reconciliation. Like, we know you've come to us to tell us that you want to make things right, we believe that's the right plan because we're all supposed to live at peace with one another. We're supposed to forgive, we're supposed to show mercy, and we want you both to be okay. So we're going to come along and try to help facilitate that. Now, if that still doesn't work, if then that's when the next step includes more people. When you would go, Jesus says that you would go to the church.
It wasn't a church.
Well, but you would go to the assembly of the people, maybe to the collection of the disciples. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. Well, clearly, Jesus is anticipating problems that will occur after his death. I don't know. But it is sort of a plan for all of Jesus' followers how to make things better. If one-on-one doesn't work, then take some other people along with you, 2 or 3, that can help move it along. And if that doesn't work, then you can take it to the church. We have always suggested here that means it goes to the elders first, that the spiritual leaders of the congregation would try to facilitate the reconciliation. The airing of grievances, trying to come up with a plan to solve it. And if that doesn't work, then the elders here, that they would approach the congregation and let them know that there has been this instance and that this person has been unrepentant, and in their view, they should be repenting and seeking forgiveness, but they have refused to. We never wanted to get to that level. Because again, the real focus is trying to restore the relationship. It's not to slap down people who are acting badly. It's to try to fix relationships inside the body of believers. If that doesn't work by going to the church, then Jesus says that person is to be treated as a pagan or a tax collector. Now, in my years, I have heard at least 2 different approaches to what that means. Some people have taught that if you're treating somebody as a pagan or a tax collector, if that's what Jesus says to do, then you'd have to ask the question, well, how does Jesus treat a pagan or tax collector?
Right.
Jesus is always
Love.
Jesus is always very open, very accepting. He doesn't hold them at arm's length, that he hangs out with tax collectors and prostitutes and all kinds of bad people. He expresses love to them. And that would make sense, that if they have gotten so far bent away from you, and it doesn't seem like anything is working, then you just love the snot out of them over and over again. You would heap burning coals of kindness on their head or on their lap, or whatever the right quote is. But there's also a fair amount of discussion that Jesus is really pointing toward excommunicating, which is a really big, scary word. But to put somebody outside of the body, again, not to condemn them, but to hopefully drive them to some kind of change of heart and mind. It's not unlike being a parent. When you give punishment, it's not because you hate them and you want them to suffer. It's because you want them to change. You want there to be new behavior. And so that's why you ground. That's why you take away the keys. That's why you take away the phone. That's why you do all the things that you do, because you love them and you want them to act differently. Is it hard? Absolutely. Is there a little bit of joy in it for the parent? Maybe just a little, if we're being honest. But the primary focus is to bring about a change of behavior. That is not fun. I have been a part of that once in a previous church, and we've been through some kind of hairy, scary things here in the last 20 some years. There is no joy in telling somebody, look, you can't worship here anymore because you are bitter or divisive, or you refuse to respect the direction of the elders or whatever. You're unwilling to make this right. So until then, we're gonna have to ask you to not come back. That is really awful. There is no pleasure in that at all.
So can I ask, is that like what excommunication means? They do that in the LDS church, but it's
So
usually for
lots of
moral
other
reasons.
churches will excommunicate somebody. It probably varies a little bit from group to group about what it means. For some people, it means we're taking away your salvation. You're so unwilling to yield that you're we're unsaving you.
The LDS church, that's what they do, but they still allow you to come back to church.
They do,
If
well,
you're
yeah, but you
excommunicated,
can't
you can
take the
still go to
sacrament,
church, right?
can't take the sacrament. They believe that everything you've had done up to that point, baptism,
But you
all
don't
their
get
temple
asked,
stuff
told to not come
would
back.
have to be redone, but
Wow.
redone, but yeah, you can come back.
Yeah.
Wow.
Probably don't go there anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, you just can't take what we call communion, they call sacrament,
They take your baptism away from you.
that, everything. Like if you've been through the temple and all their ordinances and all that, everything is gone.
Wow.
But you can come back and be rebaptized. And you can, even if you don't get rebaptized, you can still come and attend. But usually that's for more moral type things
Sure.
or financial.
It's not just for, looking mean at somebody in church or refusing to be in their
So do
Sunday school
people
class.
to that point just because somebody said something to hurt
Yeah.
their feelings?
Or more, yeah.
Isn't that sinful on our part if we're allowing a rift between us and someone else just because they said something to hurt our feelings?
Well, and that's why Jesus talks about it this
Yeah.
way. If somebody sins against you, here's what you need to do to go make it right. Don't wait for them to come apologizing. You seek them out. You make the first move. You set things in motion. Don't wait.
Don't let it fester,
Right.
because I get offended all the time.
And when he talks there towards the end about the binding and loosing, we've seen that verse before, verse 18. That goes back to Matthew 16, where he's talking to Peter about binding and loosing. It's almost the same words there. Most commentators feel like the direction there is that if there hasn't been resolution one-on-one or with witnesses or to the church leadership and the rest of the congregation, if it hasn't worked, if there's been no reconciling, then all of the church body is bound to live up to that decision. If the leaders of the church have said they are a pagan, they're a tax collector, we're excommunicating them, then that's what everybody needs to do. But I suppose the opposite would be true as well. If the leaders of the congregation were to say to the church, look, we need to love these people and here's how we're going to treat them, again, it would be incumbent on all the rest of the congregation to live up to those directions as well. There shouldn't be any room in the church for politicizing or factionalizing or dividing into this camp and that camp, because that will kill a church. I'm with this one, I'm with that one, and we can't get along. That everybody's got to be together.
It really sucks.
A house divided against itself cannot stand. Right? So
Can I have one more question?
Yes,
So,
Shirley.
when it says take, if none of those things work, it says take it before the church, does that mean like announce it from the pulpit, you know?
Probably
And
at
really-
some point it might, the way that we understand it here is that we wouldn't just call all the congregation together. Like, okay, so you make me mad, you sin against me. And I go to you and you say, leave me alone. And I take my friends here with me and you say, all of you leave me alone. Then I go to the elders and say, Shirley's being a big meanie to me and she hurt my feelings and she has done this thing which is not just offensive, but is sinful. And the elders would talk about it and they would approach you and me and try to bring about reconciliation. And if you still said, leave me alone, all of you, I can't stand the way you are up in my business, then the elders would say to the congregation, brothers and sisters, you need to know about this situation. James and Shirley have gotten crossways. We have tried to bring about a restoration of the relationship. James is willing to forgive. Shirley is unwilling to change her ways. And because of that, we have asked her to not worship with us. We're not calling into question her love for Jesus, but we've asked her to not attend worship services here. And so we're asking all of you to respect that decision and to act accordingly.
And could that?
And there wouldn't be a vote. It wouldn't be,
Okay.
all in favor of kicking Shirley to the curb, say aye. There would be none of that kind of a deal. But that this thing that has been bound by the church's leadership should be followed.
Could they ever come back at some point?
Sure. They
What,
wouldn't just
you
show
would
up on the
talk to
Sunday
the
morning,
elders?
but they would, the first person they would need to talk to, you would need to come talk to me
You,
first
okay.
and say, James, I've been a fool, such a fool. Will you ever forgive me? I'll say, absolutely, Shirley, of course. And then I would go to the elders and say, Shirley and I have made things right. Is it okay if she returns to worship here?
Oh, okay. No, it's just very, it's different than what I was raised, so that's why I had so many questions.
Again, I think if you look at everything else that's going on before this, the main focus is humility and putting the needs of others ahead of your own and not looking down on somebody, to be very careful to care for your brothers and sisters. So I don't think that the main point here is to use this as a weapon. This is not a yeah, this is not an offensive weapon. This is more, well, kind of. It is a tool to bring things back around to the way that they should be. Not to just sit back and wait for somebody to get over themselves and to do the right thing, but because of love, because of the desire for unity, to go and make things right. Now, verses 19 and 20. If two of you on earth agree about anything, it'll be done for them by my Father in heaven. Where two or three gather in my name, there I am with them. I would imagine that's possible. You have heard that these verses have been applied to prayer and getting some specific result that you're looking for. If I can just get two or three people to come along with me and pray about this, then God has to do it because Jesus says so. That's how you split a church. Yes, Robert.
Sorry, but on verse 18, like again, everything said, but where does the in heaven play into the, what's the deeper? The meaning behind that? The dummy version.
Well, let me move on just a half of a paragraph and maybe that'll get answered. Okay. Have felt for a very long time and believe that there's reason and logic behind it that using these two verses here, wherever two or three are gathered in my name, there I am with them. So ask for whatever you want with these two or three people and I'll do it. I've always felt like that is a misapplication. That is really kind of out of the context of what Jesus is saying. Okay. He talks about prayer in other places and he doesn't make that kind of a promise. Here, I believe it has specifically to do with the fractured relationships inside a church. Again, the context is the settling of differences between believers. So if the two people who are at odds can finally agree and they can settle their differences, then it'll be bound in heaven, it'll be bound on earth. Things are fixed. God sees that and he puts his stamp of approval on it. He ratifies that. That is the binding in heaven. That God sees it and says, nice job, fellas. Good job, girls. Way to make that better. You've healed it there. It's healed here too. Swell. And if it is not fixed, then God would give his approval to that as well. That his will and his purpose stand behind that reconciliation. And so if there are decisions that are made on earth by leaders of the church or the apostles or disciples or whoever it would have been, whoever it is now, that God will give his approval to those decisions as well, because they're not entered into lightly. They're done with a great deal of prayer, with a great deal of concern and compassion. It's not just, yeah, here's a problem, out. That God does not bless that. He's given us steps here. Okay. I have said it myself on a Sunday morning in the last 30 some years. You know, the Bible tells us that wherever two or three are gathered, God is there in the midst of them. And there's 150 of us here in church. We know that God is clearly with us. Is that wrong? Probably not. It's probably true. Is that what Jesus is trying to teach here in this passage? No. What God is trying to teach is that he is in the middle of unity and reconciliation and forgiveness. And when people are working towards that, they're absolutely with him. They're in his presence. They're on his turf when they're trying to extend mercy and forgiveness to each other. Does it hurt to have other people pray with you about things that you want? Absolutely not. Is it a guarantee that you're going to get it? No. There's other conditions there about praying in Jesus's name, praying his will and his purposes. You know, God, I'm praying that you're going to give me a brand new $500,000 mobile home. It's not going to do that, because that is really not his plan or his purpose for my life. Even if I get two or three other people to pray with me about that, we're not forcing God to give me something that's outside of his will or his purposes for my life. What do you think?
This scripture is always, I've only always heard it referred to as praying, as pertaining to prayer or whatever you ask. I've never heard it. But it's actually tied to the situation.
But it's right after it, so it would make sense.
And it's right before this parable that Jesus is going to tell to further deal with the question of forgiveness. So I think it absolutely is connected, like down to the cellular level. It is connected to this reconciliation and restoring relationships.
Which really makes sense. That makes far more sense to me than the, you know, we can pray for whatever we want, because there's 2 or 3 of us. And we'll have it. Yes, yes. that-
Which is usually followed by.
Yeah, that's how I always interpreted it too.
And then, that is a not uncommon application. There are so many churches that look at that verse and say, well, 2 or 3 of you on earth gather, you agree, Jesus is going to give it to you.
It's just the
I really,
common teaching.
it may be true, but that is not what Jesus is aiming to teach here. He is aiming to teach about relationships amongst his believers, amongst the followers of Jesus.
Because when you take in context, like you say, what he was just talking about right before.
And what he's going to talk about right after. I mean, it might be different if he went on to have the next thing was about prayer. I might be able to go, okay, well, this is like a transitional thing, and he is going to talk about prayer, but he's still right there on forgiveness. In verses 21 and 22, Peter asks the question about forgiveness. How many times should I forgive? And so Jesus tells the parable. Okay, we should probably just go ahead and read that part out loud. Where am I? Matthew 18. Come on, phone.
If you think about it and compare the 2 things, if you're not supposed to be easily offended, then the whole first part, you have to be really offended to go to somebody rather than just overlook it and say,
Yeah.
I think it does put a little bit of the burden on you to go, it was
Not
really
that big
not
a
that big of a
deal.
deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And a
should
lot of
I
times
should
it's
let
not.
this go.
Yeah.
But if you
And I
can't,
think
then
it-
clearly the right move is for you to go
What
and
does
to
it
talk to
say
the person.
not to be offended? I
it's
may have
it's
missed
in the
something.
forgiving. How often should I forgive? Up to 70 times 7.
Oh, it's in the, okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
let's-
the later part.
Let's do verse 21. Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times. And Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times. Like, whew. Nope, 77 times. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and children and all that he had, be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me, and I will pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged, appropriately so, and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In his anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from the heart. Okay. You have heard that parable before more than once, probably. The short version is a king wants to settle accounts. He calls in the debtors. There's a man who owes, this says 10,000 bags of gold, 10,000 talents, which is an impossibly huge amount of money. Rather than face imprisonment of himself and his family, the man begs for mercy, and the master gives it. I'll pay everything back. You can't. There's no way you can pay it back. And so the debt is forgiven and man's released. So he goes home or goes to the break room and the whatever at the office. He finds a friend who owes him 100 denarii, which is a mere pittance in comparison to his forgiven debt. So the math here is that a talent is worth 6,000 denarii. So number one owes 10,000 talents. Number two owes 100 denarii. So if you're translating them into the same numbers, the same denarii, it's 60 million denarii versus 100.
Hmm.
That's crazy. So the servant who found the king's mercy demanded repayment, begins to choke his friend. He's thrown into jail where he will sit forever because you cannot repay that kind of a debt. I don't know how you would ever spend that or even have the nerve to ask for that kind of a loan. But the king hears about it. He hears about this injustice, throws the original servant into jail where he would be tortured until repayment is made. And the punchline, the whole point of the parable, is that this is how God will deal with people. He is willing to forgive an incredible, insanely ridiculous amount. God says, all right, I'll wipe that off. He is willing to extend mercy, but he will also punish mercilessly. He will forgive mercifully, but when he punishes, it will be mercilessly. And Jesus does not see a contradiction in that. You ask for forgiveness, I'll forgive it. But if you won't forgive somebody the piddly little amount, I won't forgive you. And you will pay. You will be punished. He is a God of great compassion, incredible mercy, so much that he cannot accept those who won't express that same compassion and mercy to others. The point of the passage is those who are forgiven must forgive. God is merciful. He forgives mercifully, but he also punishes mercilessly. Jesus doesn't have a problem with that. There are a lot of people who do. Well, shouldn't he just always be merciful? He wants to be merciful, and he expects those he has shown mercy to show mercy. Comments? Rebuttal? Confession?
I'm gonna have to go make a phone call after this.
Uh,
Thoroughly hits, but it really. Those last two verses really hit.
It seems like he starts into it sort of slowly, like you first read it, like, okay, you said something or done something that irritated me or I perceived as an insult. By the time you get to the back, it's like insults are nothing compared to what he's talking. He's talking about character.
Well, I
Okay,
think of all I've been forgiven for. And I can't forgive somebody for one sentence.
mhm.
A holy,
That really hits.
pure, totally righteous God in whom there is not a speck of evil or malice or unrighteousness is offended cosmically, universally by us, our selfishness, our hate, our rebellion, the injustice that we perpetrate on each other. He sees that, and he is, it absolutely flies in the face of everything that he stands for. But he is willing to forgive us. And so if you hurt my feelings, or if you shoot my dog, or if you burned down my house or whatever it is. In comparison to what I have done to a holy and righteous God, it's really kind of small potatoes. And because I've been forgiven so much, I have to be ready. I have to be willing to forgive other people. Just period. That's end of discussion.
Taking that one step further, say you forgive somebody that's done something. Take it one step further, you can forgive them, it's good for both of you, but you no longer really want to communicate or be anywhere, have relationship with them other than. have
Well, it
a
doesn't
nice
say you have to take them to Disneyland with you the next time you go on vacation.
You don't have to forget, but you better forgive.
day. You don't forget, yeah.
And sometimes with, if it's a really toxic type person or whatever, sometimes you do kind of need to, you know, separate yourself, but that doesn't mean you can't forgive them.
Yeah, if Stacy was beating me every weekend, you know, trashing me and verbally, emotionally, and in every other way abusing me, I would need to forgive her, but I would also need to get a new house. It's not good for her, it's not good for me, and I'm not gonna put myself in that situation anymore.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I think forgiving helps you as much as it does the person you forgive.
Sometimes when I evaluate situations too, where I think there's always two sides to every story and yeah, he might have done this but then you can think, well, you know what? I made this mistake. Maybe his is a bigger sin than my sin. But yeah, a lot of times we can always try to get ourselves to look at both sides of the story and realize there was fault on both sides.
And forgiving somebody doesn't mean you're gonna fix it.
Or that you condone what.
you know, one of the things that's true in whatever Jesus talks about forgiveness, I can't think of a place where the forgiveness is a benefit to the offender. You need to forgive them so this will happen to them. So it'll benefit them, so it'll change them. That's never, as far as I can think, that's never the point. It's always directed at yourself. You need to forgive them for you, for your own benefit, for your own spiritual health, for your own growth and development. You need to forgive because it is good for you. Your grudge, your bitterness, your hatred or frustration against that person is not doing anything to them. It's not having any impact on them. They're totally oblivious, probably. But it is eating you up. You need to let go of that. You need to forgive that person, whether they ever apologize or not. You need to move on for your own benefit. Because if you're not willing to move on and forgive, God is not going to forgive you.
Seems like a really big check mark on the page of trying to be more Christ-like.
I was told once that by you not forgiving, that's like you taking poison and waiting for the other person to die.
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
You're
That's a
familiar
very
with
good
Bill
point.
Gothard's teachings?
Boo.
Bill Gothard did the Institute of Basic Youth Conflicts is what it started with way back in the 80s. He did conferences and stuff. And he used to say that basically if you don't forgive and you hold that grudge, you become bitter. And the more you focus on that, that's what you become. So for good reason, if for no other reason, you forgive so you don't become like what you hate.
Bitter and angry and spewing out anger all the time. That's what
I mean,
people
when
do.
I heard that as in young 20s, it was like, oh Lord, I don't want to be like that person.
Yeah.
And that goes back to Proverbs, bitterness is rottenness to the bones. So yeah, it does just turn.
More forgiver, isn't it? And
I
forgiver,
think it is aimed
yeah.
at us. All right. So, at the end of this passage, after delivering this pretty consistently developing theme about the way we look at others and the way we accept others and our relationship with them and forgiving sin, with all this, that kind of wraps up this whole big bundle. And in Matthew 19:1, it says that Jesus left Galilee. He went into the region of Judea on the other side of the Jordan. Mark 10:1 says the same thing. Jesus left the place and went to the region of Judea and across the Jordan. So here's one of the spots where sort of the timeline and the gospel accounts get kind of sketchy. Matthew and Mark say that he left the region of Galilee and went across the Jordan into the region of Judea. The Transjordan, that's what that means. In Luke 9:51, it marks the transition of Jesus's ministry from Galilee to Jerusalem. So it looks like he's leaving there for good in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I gotta say, when I read John, it's not clear. Because when John starts with this piece, he's got Jesus making another trips back up to Galilee. What's right? I don't know. Why is it different? I don't know. But we'll try to do our best to weave it all together. What I do know for sure is true is that Jesus is, it really is kind of like the next major movement in his mission. That he seems to be primarily done with being up in Galilee, teaching, preaching, healing, all the things we've seen him do all over the Sea of Galilee. And now he has kind of turned his direction south to Jerusalem. The end is getting closer and closer. The time is getting shorter. And he knows that before too very long, he is going to be completing his ultimate mission. Okay. When we read through the passages, we see things like he's approaching Samaria. On the way to where Martha opened her home, Jesus went through towns and villages. On his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee on his way to Jerusalem. So we will continue to see, even in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that it's just it's not as clear as I would like for it to be. I wish there were little notes in here where John would say, and I don't care about all this because I'm focusing on this instead. This is all true, but I'm not writing it down. Or that any of the gospel writers would make those kind of remarks. But so we're going to leave Matthew, Mark, and Luke now for a little bit, and we're going to go over to the Gospel of John. So go to John 7. Because I believe we have mentioned that most of John's gospel deals with the last week of Jesus's life. Like from the end of John 11 to John 21, the end of the book, it really is all just about the last week of Jesus's life. So here in John 7:1, after this, Jesus went around Galilee. He did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders were looking for a way to kill him. But when the Jewish festival of tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, "Leave Galilee and go to Judea so that your disciples there may see the works you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world." For even his own brothers did not believe in him. Therefore, Jesus told them, my time is not yet come. For you, any time will do. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify that its works are evil. You go to the festival. I am not going up to this festival because my time has not yet fully come. After he had said this, he stayed in Galilee. However, after his brothers had left for the festival, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. Now, at the festival, the Jewish leaders were watching for Jesus and asking, where is he? Among the crowds, there was widespread whispering about him. Some said, he's a good man. Others replied, no, he deceives the people. But no one would say anything publicly about him for fear of the leaders. Okay, so this kind of might sort of feel like a little bit of a throwaway passage, but I think there's a lot of stuff packed in here that's really kind of important. We should talk about the festivals first. There are three main festivals that require the attendance of all Jewish men: Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles or Booths. You know what Passover is. We've talked about it before. Pentecost is 50 days after Passover. Then there is this Tabernacles one in the fall. It was in the 15th day of the 7th month. It began the day after or 5 days after Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. So you have the big sacrifice where the sins of the people are put onto the goat and sent out into the wilderness. 5 days later, the Feast of Tabernacles begins. Sometime on our calendars around the second week of October. So it's a fall festival, a fall holiday. And what the people did was they would just essentially go camping for a week. They would go make shelters out of branches and boughs and leaves and things. And it would be a remembering of the Israelites' time in the wilderness when they were there for 40 years. Let's not get too far away from our roots. Remember, we were lost and we wandered because of our sinful disobedience. It's usually a very happy time, kind of a fun festival. That's what's going on. It is the Feast of Tabernacles. People are heading to Jerusalem. And so we see here in the verses that we've read, really about three different, maybe four different reactions to Jesus. The first one that we see is the doubt from his brothers. These are his actual siblings, the people who grew up in the house with him and Mary and Joseph. What do they want him to do? Hey, bro, you want to be a big shot? You want everybody to know who you are? You want to go to Jerusalem? Everybody who wants to be anybody is going to go to Jerusalem. This is a great time. People are coming from all over the nation to be here. You would get so much more press, so much more publicity. So many more people would see you if you would just go to Jerusalem. As a brother, I don't know how I feel about this. Because I feel like there's a couple of possibilities here. One is not very likely, which is they really sincerely mean that Jesus should go and make his presence known in Jerusalem, because he's kind of a big deal. But I don't think that's the case because of what we read later in the passage. Verse 5 says that they did not believe in him. I feel like more likely it is kind of at least sarcastic. Brother, if you want to be famous, you got to get out of here. Let people see you. Don't hide here in Galilee. Head off to Jerusalem, bro. That'll be great. That feels more likely, unfortunately. They don't recognize him as being different, other than he's weird. Remember, it's been several chapters ago, but back in Mark 3, verse 21, Jesus is doing his thing, and his family is there to collect him. And the text says, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. They believe he is insane. The brothers think he's nuts. Sure, go to Jerusalem, man. That'd be great. Do it. Be awesome. Let us know how that works out for you. So he's got doubt from the people who have known him the longest and probably known him the best. We also see increased opposition from the Jewish leaders. Over the last several chapters, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we have seen the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, come to Jesus to question him, to have a debate with him. They talk to his disciples. They ask the disciples questions about why he does this or that, why he's not doing this or that. How does he think about this or that? But at this point, they're not arguing anymore. They're not debating. They're looking for a way to have him killed. And here's the reason. The status quo with Rome, where the Jewish leadership maintains control, and they're allowed to pretty much do most of what they would like to do. Rome allows them to function. That arrangement depends on everybody behaving themselves and towing the line. You can't have somebody who's trying to start a revolution over here, or somebody who's going to stir up an uprising over here. The Jewish leadership is going to be fast on all that kind of stuff. You get some kind of whack job who's going to revolt against Rome. The Jewish leaders are going to put that down to protect their own positions, but also to keep things the way that they are for their people. They don't want them to suffer at the hands of Rome any more than they already are. So what Jesus has been teaching, the Jewish leaders feel is a threat to that status quo. He could incite riots or revolution. A couple times they've tried to make him the king, or they've announced that he's the king, and we don't want any of the kind of that nonsense going on, because Rome is going to be here with the army and they will kill us all. We can't let that happen. And Jesus recognizes that the leadership hates him. Well, he says it right there in the text. They hate him. Why? He challenges traditions. He sees through the makeup and the mask. He knows what's really going on. He understands the hearts of men and women. And he's not afraid to point out hypocrisy and sin. That's one of his favorite things to say to the Pharisees all during his ministry, is that they're hypocrites. They're pretending. I don't like it when people point out my mistakes. And the Jewish leaders don't like it either. They want him to go away. And so they're all in Jerusalem. They're watching for him. They know, because he is devout, that he lives by the words and the laws of God. They know he's going to show up at some point. And so keep your eyes out. There's wanted posters. I don't know. But hey, if anybody happens to see Jesus, we would really like to see him too while he's here. Okay. So you've got the doubt of the brothers. You've got the opposition from the Jewish leaders. What we also see is that even amongst just the general people, there's a great deal of division. People understand him in really one of two ways. You know, for a couple of years now, the reports of his adventures and exploits around Judea have been passed from place to place by word of mouth. The miracles that he's performed, the things that he has said, that gets spread around. And as you would expect, it's true today still, there is a fair amount of polarization. I don't know if you've noticed that in our country in the last several years, but you're either all the way this way or all the way that way. Doesn't seem to be really a lot of middle ground. Because on one hand, you've got people who have been touched by Jesus, who have seen his miracles, who have been the recipient of his teachings and his miracles, and they say, oh, he is amazing, he is good, he is such a good man. We believe great things about Jesus. And you've got the other side that says, oh no, he's a charlatan. He's a snake oil salesman. I don't know what he's trying to prove, but everything he does is a lie. Left and right, the believing, not believing, in favor of, not in favor of, the people are really divided. But the wrinkle here, which is different than maybe our situation in the United States. I mean, we can say whatever we want and we'll lose a friend. We might, make Thanksgiving or Christmas a little tense because of our political views, the things that we've spouted on Facebook. But at this point, nobody is going to call us to account for that. That's the difference here. If you said, oh, Jesus is clearly the Messiah, he is the coming king. If you said that too loud, the Jewish leaders are going to scoop you up and put you away and either throw you out of the nation, they'll excommunicate you, or you could be arrested. You could be killed, tried as a traitor. But if you say Jesus is a fake and a deceiver too loud, then the other group might not embrace you or have anything to do with you either. No one's going to take a stand publicly, because if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person, you're either a conspirator or you're a traitor. It made me think about what Jesus said earlier back in Matthew chapter 10, verse 34. Don't suppose I have come to bring peace to the earth. I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. This is not unexpected. Jesus knows you're either with me or you're against me. And he just said that a few verses ago in Matthew 18, when talking about casting out demons. If somebody is doing the same work that we are, if they're not against us, they're for us. And it seems to still be true. So I mean that there's a lot of telling stuff there. His brothers are kind of trying to hang him out to dry. The Jewish leadership wants to have him killed. The people in the nation don't know what to believe. Some of them are with him, some of them are against him. But with all of that stuff, knowing all of it, he just kind of pushes that aside. And Jesus maintains control of his mission and the schedule. He's not allowing the sentiments of anybody to either keep him from doing what he needs to do or to push him to doing something different. He knows that if he goes to Jerusalem, things are going to change. Things are going to happen. And he knows that they will happen. He knows that they must happen, but only in God's timing. So he says to these amazing brothers, why don't you all go on ahead? You just go on without me. I won't go up to the festival. And I believe that when he says that to them, he means that, he believes that that's gonna be the case. But after they've left, maybe, I don't know if it's the same day or a couple days later, Jesus decides he will go to Jerusalem. But he's gonna go not with all of the entourage. He's not taking 12 disciples and all of the crowds with him. He's just gonna go privately. Because he doesn't want to catch the attention of the leaders in Jerusalem. He can't lay low if he shows up with a parade. So it is the Father's timing that is guiding Jesus's decisions and steps, not any kind of public or personal pressure. And there's probably a lesson for us there. No matter how anybody else feels about things, if God has directed us to do something, we just need to be faithful to do it. No matter if anybody's going to like it or love it or hate it. If people are pushing us to go faster or to go slower, we need to follow the path that God has laid out for us. And Jesus also points out that in this passage that he doesn't belong to this world. He's an outsider. He's an alien, and because of that, the world hates him. The world will always choose to get rid of people that make sin obvious. You point out flaws and failures, people will always retaliate and turn the tables on you and have you done away with. Those who are doing shady deeds in the darkness don't love God's light. Like Jesus talked about that back in John 3 with Nicodemus, that what's done in the darkness will be proclaimed in the light. We do things in the dark because we think nobody can see us. We can get away with it, but the light always exposes the deeds done. Dirt cheap. So, what do you think about all that? Maybe by the time we celebrate Jesus's birth in a week, we'll be ready to move on and see how all the rest of this unfolds. We know how it unfolds. It's just getting through it. So we're going to take a break next week on the 26th. The current plan is to meet again on the 2nd of January. But that would probably be subject to weather and other plans. So we'll mark it here in John 7 and plan to pick up again in the new year and move along in this study. Thanks for being here. If you happen to be watching online, thanks for stopping by. Feel free to make a comment, subscribe to the channel. That way, every time I do new video tricks, you'll be notified of that. So thanks a lot.